Hello and welcome to English 278. As you all know, my name is Joseph Lewis and I will be your instructor for this semester, this actually 7-week semester that will be delivered entirely online through e-learning, and it'll be a 7-week semester. Every week, what I like to do is I like to talk just briefly about the learning materials that you all will read over the week and also address any questions that you might have brought up in last week's discussion board posts or any feedback that that I'm able to give to the class. For this week's video, I just wanted to talk briefly about how the class is going to be run and also go over a couple of points in the syllabus along with touching on some points with your reading materials for this week. So, if you are not aware, just a reminder that this is an iNet course, which means that everything is run entirely online. If you need to meet with me during office hours, or if you feel more comfortable meeting with me face to face, you can do that by sending me an email and setting up an appointment with me, and we can meet in the office at some time. As stated on the syllabus, you will have two textbooks, or two novels, I should say. The first one is Clay's Ark by Octavia Butler, and the second one is Long Division by K.C. Lyman. Along with these reading materials, you'll also have supplement reading materials that talk about the fiction, but you'll also be reading other forms of fiction within the literary movements that we'll cover, and all of the things that you need to know for the class and all of the reading materials will be located in the content section of e-learning. So right now I'm pulling up the course management site right now. And if you look at week one, it'll have a list of all the things that I want you to read, all of the websites, all of the YouTube clips that I want you to review for the week. And most of the time, I'll have that in the order in which I want you to view those things. So you view everything in the course content based off of the week, and then you answer the questions for the discussion board posts that accompany those readings. As defined in the syllabus, the course procedures, everything will be updated on Tuesday, and then you will have until Sunday, 12 noon, to finish your discussion board posts and finish your readings. And then Mondays, I would like you to review your peers' discussion board posts to kind of get us oriented and get you understanding on what your peers are talking about in relationship to the reading materials. It's always beneficial for you to go back and read your peers' posts, because sometimes you might have missed something, or sometimes one of your classmates might ask a question that you weren't for sure that you were having trouble on this, but it's not until they've recognized it that you've been able to like sort of locate that issue. As stated in the syllabus, you will be responsible for 6 discussion board posts. And those 6 discussion board posts are 90% of your grade. Along with that, you will also do a final project, and the details on the final project will be introduced to you next week. I don't want to overload you with too many things this week. Let's see, I'm just going through the syllabus now to make sure I'm not missing anything. I included on your syllabus, on your discussion board posts, we will be talking about, or I should say, you'll have basically 3 different types of questions. The first type deal with methodology, genre, and literary movements. The second type deals with literary analysis, and the third type deals with synthesis of the literature. Don't let these terms confuse you, or don't let these terms scare you away. Basically, what I'm doing is just I'm organizing the questions around these 3 larger sort of contexts. So the first context, and I'll be talking about this every week, deals with methodology. And so if you look in your announcements page, I left you a link that talks about the methodology. Now, what I'm going to be doing over the course of this semester is giving you shameless plugs for my other lit classes and my other comp classes that I teach here at Delta. And so I do teach a class called English 219, which is all focused on methods. And then when I teach other lit classes, we talk about methods to help you, to give you some strategies and to help you read the literature a little bit more effectively. So just a really quick explanation about that is that literature or the literary analysis has methodological approaches, or what are called schools of criticism. And this week you'll be reading about you'll be reading about a literary approach called New Criticism. And New Criticism was the dominant approach to literary analysis around this time that we are working with, around the early 1900s all the way up through to the 1960s. And New Criticism relies on the idea that we find meaning, or we interpret the text by just looking at the text. We don't care about the author's background. We don't care about the historical period. We don't care about the social context. We don't care about gender. All we care about are the words in the actual text. And so over the course of the semester, we're going to talk about New Criticism. We'll talk about other forms of schools of criticism, such as biographical criticism, which does the complete opposite and looks at the author's biography, looks at the author's life to determine meaning. We'll also talk about a form of school of criticism called structuralism, which looks at things like the generic distinctions, the generic sort of features to sort of come to a larger sort of conclusion on this is where this text fits. So for instance, there are going to be features and characteristics that signify this literature within the Harlem Renaissance, versus there will be characteristics within certain poems that signify these poems under the Black Arts movement. And so we're going to talk about throughout the course of the week these different approaches to literature, along with genre characteristics, along with the literary movements. And the literary movements that we're going to talk about within this period, which is the modern period, will be the Harlem Renaissance, which we'll start off with first. The second one that we'll talk about is naturalism and realism. And then we're going to move on to the Black Arts movement. And then finally, we're going to deal with African American literature from the contemporary period. And one of the subgenres within that contemporary period is Afrofuturism, which is sort of this version of science fiction. Hence, that's why we're going to be reading Clay's Ark by Octavia Butler. So make sure that you read the syllabus closely. I also define, or I should say I describe what a discussion board post should look like. I give you a description of that in the rubric. I also include a course schedule. So the course schedule, as a reminder, is tentative. Things can change based off of how you all are responding to the literature, the type of challenges that you're having. So I like to meet those challenges. So I'm extremely flexible about the schedule. I'm just looking at the schedule right now. Like I said before, we're going to cover those major literary movements within the modern era. And when we think about the modern era, we're thinking about the early 1900s up to contemporary times. And let's see if there's anything else on the syllabus that I want to make sure that we all have an understanding of. As you read, one of the things I want you to be aware of is the communication as well. I will be available. Email is the best way to contact me, or through the discussion board post. I also left my cell phone number if you would like to text me. But please be aware that it may take me up to 24 hours to get back to respond to you, along with that, depending on the nature and complexity of your issue. And also be aware that if you respond to me, if you ask me a question on Friday, there's a possibility that I won't get back to you until the following Monday. Also keep in mind that I will never hold you accountable for an issue if I don't get back with you and you have a question about a particular assignment and it's past the due date. That's always on me. So you'll never be responsible for me being overloaded with emails because that happens sometimes. So those are the things that I wanted to just cover in regards to the policies of the course along with the syllabus. Again, if you have any questions, please pose those questions and let me know those questions that you might have or anything that I can clarify. So again, this week you will be covering reading material that discusses authors from the Harlem Renaissance. You'll be looking at a website from the Harlem Renaissance, also a YouTube clip narrated by Henry Louis Gates, who is a very influential African American scholar. He teaches at Harvard currently. And also, you'll be reading an introduction on the Harlem Renaissance. Some of the authors that we're going to cover over the course of this week is Alain Locke. Alain Locke was very influential to the Harlem Renaissance, and you want to kind of think of him as sort of like the granddaddy of the Harlem Renaissance in the sense that he was much older than his contemporaries at this time, so he basically made a way for these authors' names to be known, such as Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes, who collaborated on a couple of writing projects. Some of the main sort of philosophical debates that are going on at this time too, well, let me back up a little bit, is that the Harlem Renaissance is coming out of a time of the Reconstruction period. And the Reconstruction period is this period, post the Civil War. So literature of African American culture prior to the Reconstruction period, a lot of that literature was abolitionist literature arguing against slavery. And then once slavery was abolished, then the question became what to do with the newly freed slave. So you have these two major philosophical movements developing, or even more than two, but the three main ones, I should say, that were developing around this time was you have this Booker T. Washington approach, which was much more focused on agriculture, much more focused on the material, much more focused on educating the newly freed slave by empowering him by the hands first. So farming, agriculture, whereas W.E.B. Du Bois, who you'll read about in the introduction, was much more concerned with the philosophical, the aesthetic aspect. He believed in this idea of the talented tenth, so that, we put all of our efforts into the sort of upper classes, the intelligentsia, and this sort of empowerment and knowledge will trickle down to the masses of African American culture. And then you have another sort of ideology emerging of this time, the Marcus Garvey approach, which was basically going back to saying that African Americans needed to go back to Africa. So, if you want to do further research on Liberia, for instance, in West Africa, that was a colonized country that a lot of African Americans at this time were returning to. So these are some of the main sort of philosophical movements that are going on at this time. And we find these writers such as George Samuel Schuyler, Claude McKay, Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston sort of fitting within these philosophical movements. So like Zora Neale Hurston, for instance, was more of this person that wanted to celebrate the characteristics of African American culture. So you're going to read a little bit about what she's talking about in characteristics of Negro expression. George Samuel Schuyler, on the other hand, he was against any sort of connection between African Americans and people on the continent of Africa, because his main idea was that the situation or the aesthetic condition that African Americans find themselves is not a product of race, but more of a product of environmental and social conditions. Whereas Langston Hughes sort of criticizes George Samuel Schuyler in his The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, basically saying this idea of not wanting to being black and not wanting to be classified as a Negro artist was a way of saying that this person was sort of conflicted and wanted to be white. And then finally, you'll read poetry from Claude McKay, a West Indian writer who contributed through poetry. So hopefully, I've given you a broad sort of broad, diverse sort of sense of the voices that are coming out of this time. Along with the materials, feel free to research more materials on the Harlem Renaissance. Although that I think I'm going to keep you busy for the next week. But again, if you have any questions or concerns about what it is that you're reading or need a little bit of clarity about the methods, please feel free to ask me questions. Um, Once again, I hope to have a good semester with you. I'm excited to work with each and every one of you. I will be reading your posts, your introductory posts, as you post those throughout the week. But other than that, I'm here if you have any questions or concerns, and I will see you in cyberspace.